Sometimes all it takes is 2 words, not a speech, not a threat, just 2 words from a man who knows the weight of silence and the power of timing. In a world buzzing with noise, where diplomacy is often drowned by arrogance, one voice rose, not with fury, but with clarity. Dr. S. Jaishankar didn't raise his tone, he didn't demand attention. But when he spoke, the room went still. From Washington's corridors of power to the furthest corners of political influence, America listened. And for a moment, even the most dominant power in the world was left stunned. This isn't just about politics. This is about presence, about a man who has mastered the art of measured strength, whose words, though few, carry the weight of history, resilience, and unshakable resolve. And now you're about to hear the speech that shook the United States. With just 2 words. Sit back, listen closely, because sometimes history whispers before it roars. Power lies not in volume, but in precision. Jaishankar's diplomacy reflects India's rising global confidence. 2 words dismantled assumptions about India's silence. Global power structures shift when leaders speak with truth. Respect is earned through clarity, not confrontation. Power lies not in volume, but in precision. That is a truth forgotten in a world. Louder voices tend to dominate the stage. We have become accustomed to the belief that the one who shouts the most commands the room, that the loudest opinion wins the argument, and that dominance is proven through noise. But real influence, the kind that leaves people in silence, that makes even the most powerful nations pause and reflect. It doesn't require chaos. It requires control. It demands clarity. And most of all, it calls for the kind of precision that only true statesmen possess. Dr. S. Jaishankar has consistently shown the world that diplomacy is not a show of theatrics. It is a discipline. When he speaks, he doesn't flood the room with endless rhetoric. He offers calculated responses, rooted in experience, historical understanding, and a clear-eyed view of the world. It's easy to overlook precision because it often lacks drama. But that is exactly what makes it so powerful. The world is full of noise. Yet when someone speaks with surgical clarity, people are forced to listen. They're not just hearing words. They're decoding meaning, context, and intent. What makes Jaishankar's 2 words so impactful is not the simplicity of the phrase, but the depth it carried. It was a moment when a man chose not to impress, but to express. Not to dominate, but to define. Those 2 words weren't spoken to gain applause. They were spoken to hold a mirror to power. And in doing so, he reminded the world that power is not measured by how much you say, but how effectively you say it. In diplomacy, every word is a tool. It can build bridges, or it can destroy decades of trust. That's why the most seasoned diplomats speak with the weight of consequences in every sentence. Jaishankar's approach reveals a mastery of this art, knowing when to speak, what to say, and when to say nothing at all. It's a skill set that demands restraint, patience, and a deep understanding of geopolitical undercurrents. Precision in speech is not just about intellect. It is about courage. It means you must be willing to let your truth stand on its own, without decoration, without amplification. That's what happened in that moment. When Jaishankar spoke those two words, he trusted the strength of his nation, the intelligence of his audience, and the truth of his convictions. There was no need to explain further. In the end, the world didn't remember the silence that followed because it was empty. It remembered it because those two words filled it with meaning. That's the true power of precision. Not to overpower, but to shift perception. Not to echo, but to resonate. And in that moment, the entire world, including America, realized that India no longer needs to shout to be heard. It only needs to speak. Jaishankar's diplomacy reflects India's rising global confidence. It's not just about the man. It's about the moment and what he represents. For decades, India navigated the global arena with caution, often leaning on non-alignment, walking a fine line between global powers and choosing soft diplomacy over strong declarations. But the world is changing, and so is India. No longer the quiet observer in international conversations. India is now stepping into a more assertive role. Not through aggression, but through assured presence. Jaishankar is not creating this shift. He is articulating it with unmatched precision. When he speaks, it's not just as a diplomat representing a country. It's as a statesman embodying the emergence of a new India. One that knows its value. One that no longer seeks validation from the West. One that engages on its own terms. There's a reason why his words carry so much impact across international stages. They're not coated with uncertainty or hesitation. They come from a place of clear strategic vision, rooted in history, backed by national strength, and delivered with intellectual force. India's global confidence is no accident. It is built on a foundation of economic growth, technological advancement, geopolitical balance, and cultural resilience. Jaishankar stands at the intersection of all of this. His diplomatic tone doesn't beg for recognition. It claims space, confidently, respectfully, and unapologetically. He doesn't seek to impress global powers with flashy speeches or theatrical gestures. Instead, he focuses on substance, on aligning India's foreign policy with national interest, on speaking truth to power without being inflammatory, on calling out double standards in international relations without sounding defensive. This growing confidence is seen in how India engages with superpowers. Be it the United States, China, Russia, or Europe. There's a deliberate shift in toning, no longer reactive, but proactive. Whether it's trade, defense, or multilateral alliances, India is setting its terms while building bridges. And Jaishankar, with his calm authority, is the voice that articulates this shift in boardrooms, summits, and media interviews across the world. What's remarkable is how his tone never tries to overpower others. He doesn't shout over people. He speaks in a way that makes others lower their volume to hear him. That's not just personal charisma. That's a reflection of a country whose internal confidence is finally sensing with its external presence. A country that doesn't just participate in global dialogue but helps shape it. This new posture is not about confrontation. It's about assertion. And Jaishankar's diplomacy sends that message loud and clear. India is no longer waiting to be included. It's already at the table. Not because someone gave it a seat, but because it built its own. His words, his tone, his delivery, they all reflect a deeper truth. India has arrived not as a follower, not as a challenger, but as a sovereign equal. And the world is beginning to realize it. 2 words dismantled assumptions about India's silence. For decades, global perceptions often painted India as the passive participant in world affairs. Present, but not forceful, yet principled, quiet, affected, but rarely assertive. It was a perception built on years of cautious diplomacy and a long-standing image of restraint. But in a single moment when Jaishankar spoke, just 2 deliberate words, that assumption collapsed. It wasn't a dramatic outburst. It wasn't an emotional display. It was a precise interruption to the narrative the world had grown too comfortable believing. The silence the world associated with India wasn't born of weakness. It was patience. It was composure. It was observation. But over time, that patience was misinterpreted as passivity. That composure was misunderstood as compliance. And when a nation is constantly underestimated, there eventually comes a point when it speaks not to ask for respect, but to claim it. Jaishankar's words did exactly that. They didn't come wrapped in anger or coated in offense. They came with the weight of history and the calm of certainty. And the effect was immediate. America, used to leading the dialogue, suddenly found itself listening. What those 2 words truly exposed was the disconnect between perception and reality. While the world kept seeing India through the lens of the past, India had been evolving. Economically, politically, militarily, and strategically. And when a country transforms, but the world keeps treating it like its former self, there's bound to be a reckoning. That reckoning arrived not with noise, but with elegance. In just a breath, Jaishankar shattered the outdated lens through which many viewed India, forcing even the most powerful actor says to realize not just what India was, but what it had become. This moment also highlighted the underestimated strength of measured communication. In a time where diplomacy often feels performative, where leaders compete for airtime and headlines, Jaishankar's method stood apart. It wasn't about saying more, it was about meaning more. His 2 words weren't meant to stir controversy. They were meant to realign understanding. And they did. They dismantled the old framework and introduced a new narrative. One where doesn't wait for permission to speak, but speaks with the expectation of being heard. It's no longer about silence being mistaken for submission. It's about silence being a choice. And once that choice is lifted, what follows is not noise, but unmistakable clarity. Those 2 words, though simple, were backed by decades of rising strength, strategic diplomacy, and unyielding national identity. They weren't just words, they were a statement of intent, a challenge to old assumptions, and a declaration that India no longer fits in the margins others created for it. And that's why America and the world was shocked, not because India spoke, but because India no longer needed to explain itself. With just 2 words, Jaishankar didn't just dismantle a perception. He ended an era of silence and began an era of unapologetic presence. Global power structures shift when leaders speak with truth. Not performance, not posturing, not political theater, but truth. That kind of honesty carries a resonance that no rehearsed script can imitate. It disrupts the usual order. It makes people uncomfortable. And it demands respect. In a world dominated by diplomatic doublespeak, and veiled intentions, when a leader stands up and speaks with raw, unfiltered clarity, something changes. Not just in the room, but across the global landscape. That's what happened when Jaishankar chose to speak plainly. Not to provoke, but to reveal. Not to criticize, but to clarify. And in doing so, he disrupted the very structure of how nations engage with one another. Truth is a powerful force. It doesn't need to be shouted. It doesn't beg for validation. It simply stands. And when a nation's representative speaks it with full awareness of its weight and consequences, it realigns the power equation. For too long, global discourse has been dominated by narratives shaped by the West, especially by the United States. These narratives often position themselves as the moral compass of the world, dictating terms, defining alliances, and expecting compliance. But when Jaishankar spoke, he didn't seek to fit into that narrative. He spoke from a place of sovereign confidence, calling out the inconsistencies, the contradictions, and the selective memory that often color international relations. And that is what caused the global power structure to flinch. Because when someone speaks truth to power, especially in a space where truth is often negotiated or diluted, it forces everyone to take a step back. The illusion of control is broken. The old hierarchy, where one nation lectures and the other listens, begins to erode. Jaishankar's words reminded the world that India is not here to be taught, corrected, or managed. It is here to engage, challenge, and lead. This shift didn't happen overnight. It is the result of years of strategic positioning, internal strengthening, and a leadership that understands the world's complexities without being overwhelmed by them. But the tipping point comes when truth is spoken out loud. Because when you speak the truth in a room full of power, the balance of power shifts. People pay attention. They question their assumptions. And more importantly, they begin to see that respect is not something granted from above. It is earned through integrity and presence. Jaishankar didn't claim moral superiority. He simply pointed out the contradictions that others preferred to ignore. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried the echo of a rising India, one that is no longer content to play a supporting role on the global stage. And in that moment, the truth he spoke didn't just shake a room. It altered the rhythm of international dialogue. Because when global leaders speak with truth, they don't just represent their nations. They reset the global conversation. And in a world craving authenticity, that is the most disruptive power of all. Respect is earned through clarity, not confrontation. In international relations, this truth is often forgotten. Many believe that to be respected, a nation must dominate the conversation, assert its might, or challenge others head on. But real respect doesn't come from making noise. It comes from being unmistakably clear about who you are, what you stand for, and what you will not tolerate. Dr. S. Jaishankar embodies this principle. His style is not aggressive, but it is absolute. He doesn't confront for the sake of conflict. He speaks with clarity that leaves no room for misunderstanding. That's where the true power lies. In a world where diplomacy is often laced with ambiguity and politeness is mistaken for weakness, Jaishankar's approach stands out. He isn't disrespectful, but he isn't deferential either. He doesn't apologize for India's choices, values, or positions on the world stage. Instead, he explains them with measured confidence, unshaken by the opinions of others. And that clarity, delivered without apology, without aggression, is what commands respect, even from global powers like the United States. Clarity is not just about what is said. It's about how consistently it's said. Over time, Jaishankar has demonstrated a disciplined commitment to India's national interest, ensuring that whether in New Delhi, Washington, Moscow, or Brussels, his message remains the same. He does not bend to suit the mood of the room. He adapts without compromising. That consistency builds trust. It tells the world here is a leader who means what he says. And when leaders like that speak, others listen, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The respect Jaishankar earns is rooted in that clarity. When he responds to questions, especially pointed ones from journalists or policy critics, he doesn't evade, and he doesn't escalate. He answers directly, often turning the question itself into a reflection of broader bias or misunderstanding. That's not confrontation. That's leadership. That's the ability to stay rooted in your values while navigating complexity without being provoked into hostility. This approach is crucial for a rising power like India. As the country's influence expands, how it communicates matters just as much as what it achieves. And Jaishankar's clarity sends a strong message to the world. India will not be pushed, lectured, or sidelined. It is not looking to provoke others, but it will no longer tolerate being underestimated. And that alone shifts the dynamic of every conversation it enters. Respect that comes from confrontation is temporary. It may win a moment, but it rarely builds lasting influence. Respect that comes from clarity, on the other hand, is enduring. It creates stability. It invites collaboration. It sets boundaries without building walls. That is the kind of respect India is now earning on the world stage, and Jaishankar is at the forefront of it. In every interview, every panel, every summit, he proves that being clear, consistent, and composed is more powerful than being loud. And in doing so, he reminds the world respect is never demanded. It is drawn toward those who speak truth without fear and stand firm without aggression. And so, in a world where noise often drowns out meaning, where power is too often mistaken for volume, and where diplomacy is twisted into performance, a single moment of clarity can change everything. Calm, precise, and unshakable were enough to remind the world that India is no longer the silent participant. It is the voice that doesn't just echo. It defines. Dr. Jaishankar didn't need to raise his tone. He didn't need grand theatrics. He simply spoke with the quiet strength of a nation that has found its footing, claimed its identity, and no longer waits for permission to lead. His words were not just a message. They were a mirror, a reflection of India's rising confidence its refusal to be underestimated, and its commitment to truth over approval. This is not the India of yesterday. This is a new India, self-assured, sovereign, and steady. A nation that does not seek conflict, but will no longer hide in silence. A nation that doesn't trade clarity for comfort. And a leader who doesn't seek applause, only understanding. The world listened because it had to. And in that moment, as two words reshaped the global conversation, one thing became unmistakably clear. India will no longer be spoken for. It will speak. And when it does, the world will listen.